now, I want to take a bit of a look at graffiti and some of the history behind it, as well as understanding Banksy a little bit more. A few weeks ago, I went to Lisbon, which is the capital of Portugal, and as I was exploring the city as the sun was rising, I saw graffiti absolutely everywhere. Walls of used buildings, walls of abandoned buildings, rows of colourful bins everywhere. But there was also a lot of street art, places that were dedicated for graffiti artists to do their thing. And in fact, my favourite one was this huge wall called the Marvel Art Wall, which was in a courtyard smack bang between multiple skyscrapers in the modern district of the city. So clearly, Lisbon is a city run by artists, one where culture and creativity isn't just valued, but proudly and loudly embraced. Yet, most cities take the opposite approach, hunting down graffiti artists, calling them criminals, and putting them all behind bars. I mean, I guess no one likes to wake up to their building being vandalized with graffiti, but is it really that bad?
I think if done well, graffiti can really give a city a unique culture that makes it less industrial and different from all the other cities, and that can be very valuable.
To understand graffiti, we need to go back to a time before civilization even began, 35,000 years ago in the caves of southern France.
Quand le bouvier vient du labour.
Our ancestors were drawing pictures of lions, rhinos, deer, bison, hyenas, the whole lot. And I didn't even know that France had bison and hyenas and all of that. But anyway, these pictures, they were clearly not to functionally communicate with other humans, but they were instead a way to express ideas and emotions and share them with your family. It was a way to enjoy spending your time, your free time, and leaving your mark for the rest of humanity.
The huge amount of painted caves we've discovered yet, all the art they've left us, it shows us that those societies were in good health, because if they did have time to do all of this, it's because they had free time. And it shows they do have a life, they do have culture, they do have art as we do today. They might have not done it for the very same reason, but they do have it. And it shows that they do not just merely survive, they live.
And this is where it began. An idea which continued in pretty much the same way through the ancient Australian tribes, the Egyptians, the Romans, but then, in the 1960s, graffiti changed forever. The kids of New York, especially the groups who skateboarded everywhere, they lived through a movement known as writing.
Express yourself.
The aim was to have your name written in as many places across the city as possible.
Once you get into it, it's a very addicting thing. It's a very obsessive thing. Especially when it's just like individuals going out there to try to get their name out there as much as they can, as big as they can, as bright as they can. It just ends up being this competitive sport.
Of course, they knew this was illegal, so most writers would instead come up with their own tag to remain anonymous. And you can think of a tag as a kind of signature, but it's not actually your real name. But as you can imagine, just taking a Sharpie and writing your tag on the side of a train or the back of a road sign isn't going to stand out very much. So these kids, they had to get creative. They began experimenting with colours, size, lettering, and coming up with new ways to represent their tag. And through the rest of the 20th century, the craft evolved rapidly. Some artists preferred to make their mark with an icon or a symbol, but most stuck to words and really focused on extracting as much out of the letters as they could. And this is why most graffiti that you see today, especially the illegal works, are centered around a word or a phrase. The idea of getting your name out there from the 1960s is still core to modern graffiti culture. In fact, these artists spend hours just perfecting their tag and figuring out ways of drawing it as fast as possible. And some have even turned their tags into physical merch to help earn a bit of extra cash. All of this just because some 1960s kids thought it'd be cool to have their name all over the place. But if you've ever aimlessly explored a Western city, such as Lisbon or Brussels, or really anywhere in America, you'd notice a lot of large paintings on the sides of buildings. Paintings so big, so good, and so prominent that they can't have been done by some hooded skateboarders at 2 a.m. These are murals, which are typically works paid for by a landlord or even the city council. Now, my favourite mural is the Tintin one in Brussels, where the artist painted some stairs on the side of a building, and they had Tintin Snowy and Captain Haddock running down the stairs, seemingly frightened and away from something. I don't really know what, but I love this mural.
I remember when England lost in the penalties in the final of the Euros, Marcus Rashford's mural in Manchester was heavily vandalised, and there were lots of derogatory phrases and words written on it. So I think these murals can have significant cultural influence.
Absolutely, and that's the reason why I loved this Tintin mural so much, because it shows the world one of the biggest cultural impacts that Brussels has had, which is comic books.
I started to explore mural arts simply because I like being outside and I like connecting to, people. I'm a real sociable dude, so when people come by, I enjoy engaging with them and hearing stories, and especially hearing stories about the community that I'm painting in. So painting murals, brought me fulfillment through the communal aspect, and also through the amount of impact that I could create just from painting a wall.
The late 1900s was a tough time for graffiti artists. The public refused to respect them, and their links to criminal gangs was just one reason for it. But over the past couple of decades, we've seen a rise in appreciation for graffiti artists, enabled, I think, by social media. The internet and rise of Instagram especially has caused a surge in popularity for murals and any sort of artwork done by these once hidden street artists. And I think the visual first nature of Instagram has made street art shine and allowed it the respect which graffiti artists have been desperate for decades.
I think that's because art goes beyond language barriers, and anybody can appreciate a piece of good art. And so Instagram has really made it easy for people to discover this art, which previously existed but weren't accessible, because previously you would have to go to the physical location of the art, whereas now you can easily see it on Instagram on your phone. And that has been really valuable, I think, for these graffiti artists.
Still, lots of landlords and governments are at war against creators, particularly in high traffic areas where tourists stream through, such as the London Underground or the Brooklyn Bridge. However, I personally reckon that these murals and this art on the side of public buildings, they actually increase the tourist flow through these areas, which is probably a good thing for the country's economy. Also, some artists, they speak out against the flooding of social media posts about graffiti, because they claim that it commodifies their craft and allows a sea of low-quality art to be made and shared. What can't be denied, however, is the positive effect that social media has had on the lives of graffiti artists. They are more in demand than they ever have been before, and after years of struggling to get by, many have become successful street artists by day, whilst remaining hippie graffitists by night. In fact, plenty of artists are being contracted to design shoes, hoodies, and other apparel that are currently popular with Gen Z. But, of course, we can't talk about graffiti without mentioning Banksy.
Who is Banksy?
The elusive street artist.
Banksy is pretty much the Batman of artists.
He's arguably the most famous graffiti artist we've ever seen, as a result of the juxtaposition between the foggy yet crystal clear identity that he's wrapped up in. Because no one really knows who Banksy is, he's just the boy from Bristol. But personally, I reckon law enforcement around the world are very well aware of his real identity, and despite there being multiple active charges against him, I think law enforcement understands the cultural significance of Banksy, and that's the reason they leave him alone. I think, more importantly, law enforcement understand the power that Banksy has. Because the backbone to Banksy's work is rooted in his distaste for authority, government, and establishments. Lots of his works are political, tackling issues such as poverty, surveillance, and the West's external involvement in the wars, particularly in the Middle East.
This is a way in which the younger generation gets their views on politics heard, because I think usually the political scene is dominated by boomers and older people so much that the young people often don't feel they have a voice. But through something like graffiti, it's really good that the younger generation can feel comfortable in discussing these issues and for them to get a voice in the world about politics.
Yeah, it's a different way of communicating and a way that a whole generation can really understand. And through this, it's how Banksy has garnered huge public support, which is why chasing after him will probably do more harm than good for any government. Banksy is also known to toy with law enforcement too. In 2013, he began a 1-month show, he called it, on the streets of New York, where every day in October, Banksy created some art on a different street of the city, warranting a whole chase from the NYPD, which of course resulted in nothing but more media attention on Banksy. Ironically, people taking Banksy art have faced more legal issues than Banksy himself. And in fact, you may remember that recent stop sign that was stolen from London after Banksy painted some war drones on it in reference to the Ukraine-Russia conflict.
Yes, I remember reading the news about that.
Banksy represents the whole hidden world of graffiti artists, and he was actually a pioneer in the field. As the chase against the NYPD heated up, Banksy realised that he needed to spend as little time as possible making his creations. Now, this was of course already well known among graffiti artists, but with all of these police resources being thrown directly at Banksy, he needed a much better way. The solution? Stencils.
I mean, they're efficient, stencils. You get to put something up in very little time, and it's very hard to mess it up.
And because no one else was using stencils at the time, Banksy's art developed the distinctive style that he's still associated with today, a style that's been the source of inspiration for many up-and-coming artists. Now, as I was researching this story, I came across the term brandalism. Quan, have you ever heard of the term brandalism before?
No, I haven't, but I can't help but think it's to do with brands and vandalism. Is that right?
Yep, absolutely. Basically, when people accuse Banksy of vandalizing cities and people's houses and public buildings, Banksy's response to that is that, well, brandalism is a real issue, not vandalism. And he defines brandalism to be exactly what you just said, which is brands that kind of display adverts all over the city, which is very prominent in America, especially across all the skyscrapers. There are huge screens with adverts of all of these companies plastered all over the place. And Banksy claims that the people walking through these streets, they're forced to see these ugly adverts they really don't want to see. And that is the real issue. That is brandalism. And his so-called vandalism is not the issue, or so he claims.
That's a really interesting perspective from Banksy about brandalism. Lots of people are just getting fed up with these corporate advertisements. And so I think Banksy represents a push against such corporate occupation of the public's attention.
It's almost synonymous with that idea that one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. So while some people think that Banksy is a criminal, to other people he's really just someone who's fighting against all of these big establishments that are exploiting their power against the general population. So it's really difficult to choose a side here, because both sides have perfectly valid arguments.
I think it shows the power that Banksy and graffiti as a movement in general has in changing the public perception on things like laws regarding vandalism and corporate marketing. And it gets people to think about the moral boundaries in between these ideas, irrespective of the law, which might say that what Banksy did is illegal.
Governments don't speak to people our age, but Banksy, he can. From its origins as a primal form of expression scrawled on cave walls to the skateboarders of New York City in the 60s, graffiti has evolved into both a form of rebellion and an artistic portfolio. What started as a game to simply mark a name has become a gateway to global recognition, clients, and even political movements. Social media has been paramount in bringing graffiti to the masses, allowing artists to monetize their work and build followings. But it's also created tension. Does commodifying street art undermine its raw rebellious roots? Or does it give artists the freedom to create without fear of persecution? Either way, one thing is clear. Graffiti, in all its forms, isn't going anywhere. The streets will always be canvases for artists to express, challenge, and make us question the world around us. As Banksy once said, imagine a city where graffiti wasn't illegal. A city where everybody could draw whatever they liked. Where every street was awash with a million colours and little phrases. Where standing at a bus stop was never boring. A city that felt like a party where everyone was invited, not just the estate agents and barons of big business. Imagine a city like that.
Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed the story, please like and subscribe to our channel. Our full episode can be found in the description, where you can also sign up to our newsletter for a summary of what we discussed delivered straight to your inbox.